right, good afternoon and welcome to Shaynel's 3 Cents. I am back from hiatus on spring break and all that great stuff, but I want to welcome you to tuning in to the show today. I'm excited to be back with you, one, because of course I miss my Boxwave family and all the folks that are here at the station, but I also miss my audience, miss all the engaging times that we have talking about things, arguing on Facebook and Twitter and all that great stuff. So again, welcome. I'm happy to be back and I'm looking forward to a great show today. Today is actually what I consider my post-Father's Day discussion. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about Father's Day, and we're also going to infuse that into our guest who's going to be on our show today, where we'll be talking about the stigma of deadbeat dads. Father's Day was this past Sunday, and hopefully each and every one of you were able to enjoy the fathers in your life, whether it was your biological dad, your stepdad, your uncles, your grandfathers, your father-in-laws, whether it was a coach, a teacher, you know, some male that positively influenced you and you looked at as a positive father figure in your life. So again, we want to salute those dads. We want to encourage those coming up dads and father figures and tell you how much we really appreciate you. I'm also going to take this time to say a belated happy Father's Day to my dad, who I recently buried this past Friday. Actually, it was last Friday. But I want to say happy belated Father's Day to him. And I think it's important not only to say that in the wake of Father's Day, but also because we're talking about deadbeat dads. My dad was a deadbeat dad. And that bears repeating. My dad's name was Leroy Purcell Jr. And this is part of the program. Hopefully it's not too showy or anything like that. But my dad was a young father, much like my mom. She was a young mother. And at that time, they were busy doing things that 18, 19-year-olds do. They're trying to go to school, trying to go to work, trying to take care of a family, and still, more importantly, trying to find themselves as a person. We always say that, oh, well, dad should always be there. He should never leave because the mom gets to stay. It's not the same thing, particularly if you know that you're not ready. And while my dad knew that he had a daughter, while he was looking forward to spending time with his daughter, he basically was not ready to be a father. And I thank God that he kept him out of my life, because there were certainly other things that I had to go through, but he allowed him to grow into the man that he turned out to be. He had bouts with drugs, he had bouts with alcohol, he had bouts with the law. Lord knows he had bouts with the law. But ultimately, when he found himself, or when the Lord got a good hold on him, he was able to put him and produce him into the awesome father that he was. He raised two awesome knucklehead sons, my brothers Tracy and Dee, and he was an awesome husband to my mother-in-law. And so, my stepmom, excuse me. But it's one of those things where we often have to remember and recall that the Bible says it's the end of a thing that's greater than the beginning of a thing. And so while you may start out not being ready to be a dad, you may start out not being ready to be a mom, you may start out not being ready to be the best at your job, the best at anything that you put into it, but give it some time. Think about what you want to do. Make sure that you understand what your decisions and your options are. Make sure that you grab a resource. Make sure that you reach out to family and friends and coworkers, and make sure that you have an environment to help you grow into whatever it is that you want to be. No one can make you do anything. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we do as a society. We try to make people do things that, one, aren't good for them, and that ultimately turn out to not be good for the other people involved in the situation as well. So I'm grateful that while my dad started as a deadbeat dad, he flourished into an awesome father, a wonderful grandfather. He was an uncle to so many people and a good friend to so many people. And again, I'm grateful that the Lord was able to bring him back into my life and to help him grow into the awesome father that he was. And so again, I say happy Father's Day to all of you out there. I hope you enjoy the wonderful things for the weekend. And again, we support you, we salute you, and we look forward to another awesome year of you being fathers and being father figures actively involved in the lives of your children, your families, and the people around you. And with that, we're going to take a quick break before we come back with our guest today, Mr. David Washington, the CEO and founder of Fair for Justice. We'll be with him right after this break. Stay tuned, and we'll see you shortly. Welcome back. We are here on Shaynel's 3 Cents with our guest for the day, the awesome, the dynamic, the multi-talented father, CEO, and founder of Fair for Justice, Mr. David Washington. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me, Shaynel.
Hey. Thank you for finally letting me drag you onto the show. I mean, I know you're busy with your government job and all that good stuff, and of course, all the activities that surround you in the nonprofit realm. So again, if you could share with our guests today, tell us a little bit about you and about your organization.
My name is David Washington. As Shaynel mentioned, I am the CEO and founder of the organization Fathers Against Injustice and Immoral Recognition. We are an advocacy group that focuses on defeating the stigma that's sort of carried fatherhood, or at least the fatherhood movement rather, along for these past 40 and 50 years, and eliminating the stigma of the deadbeat dad by providing access to services that are available to fathers that seek to give a voice to themselves, who feel powerless against an actual system that has drugged them through the mud and essentially made them feel like they have no hope. Mm-hmm. And so we act as a conduit between them and the court system by providing guidance and navigating the court system to make sure that, one, they have the resources and tools available to in order to litigate their cases, whether it's pro se or with an actual attorney, and then providing attorney referral services that would allow them to navigate their case through the family law court system. Awesome,
awesome. And while I know this is close to your heart, can you share a little bit about how you ended up in the fatherhood movement?
So I ended up in the fatherhood movement through the personal situation for myself, dealing with, at the time, my daughter was 3.5 years old, and sort of working through the process. Me being a stand-up guy, no criminal record, security clearance at the highest levels, and thinking that, with all of those accolades, that this would be essentially a cakewalk, not really knowing what I was going to be going up against, or at least, as I called it, the Goliath industry. And so when you look at the family court system itself, the family court system is a $50 billion a year industry. No. And that's, sort of broken up between child support enforcement and also child support collection services, between litigation fees that is charged to clients, which can easily move upwards depending on the type of case that you're dealing with, the hundreds of thousands of dollars essentially that could be essentially sitting in a 529 planned savings account for you and your children, instead of litigating and fighting in the courts, with your ex or your, or as some people call it, baby mom. There was an issue last week with Target and the whole baby mom phrase, and them putting cards on the shelf. We can
go there later if you want to, because I have an opinion about that. But I certainly agree, and that's very admirable. One, because it's not only comes from the heart, you have experience, but I also understand that there's quite a bit of training that you also went through to make sure that not only you could portray your personal needs and desires to help people, but to also make sure that you understood the dynamics surrounding the court system, surrounding, how people come to be able-bodied fathers and equipped with all the resources necessary.
Yes, I mean, well, as they say, experience is the best teacher. So navigating through the process of fighting and litigating my actual case without an attorney first, I was pro se through the actual court system itself. And then I realized that there were a lot of sneaky tactics, underhanded, that was done in order to allow, and unfortunately this is, a lot of women usually do this, to sort of put the sprinkle of domestic violence out there. And what typically happens with that is the simple notion and mention of it takes your case in the opposite direction. It actually generally happens a lot between the various different court systems, whether it's here in the DMV or anywhere across the U.S. I've also had individuals in the UK that actually reached out to me through my toll-free number, which I actually sunsetted recently, but that are going through the same exact type of issues. This isn't just, a U.S.-based type of thing. This goes on overseas all across the world, where you have fathers just fighting to be present in the lives of their children. And the bad part about it is you go from essentially having a family dynamic of seeing your child on a daily basis to then now navigating and migrating into a system where a judge gets 2 hours to litigate your case, and then a decision that's going to affect not only the mental health of your children but the actual individuals themselves. Now we've sort of seen this influx of suicides among fathers across the United States that have committed suicide due to various different issues surrounding mental health and relating to fathers being pushed out of the lives of their children. And mentally, that is a stronghold that can mentally overtake your mind. And again, understanding the domino effects of the medical crisis surrounding opioids. This is part of the reason why people sort of turn themselves to drugs, because of it's a coping mechanism for them. And for many fathers that seem to be powerless and attempting to sort of give them a voice, fathers don't have an actual voice in America right now. You look at the Me Too movement and seeing how that has rapidly evolved. We've seemed to given a voice to women as it relates to these issues surrounding not only domestic violence, sexual assault, but we've been silent for years on the issues surrounding men, which child support and fatherhood engagement is a critical issue that we really haven't addressed across the board. You have
reentry along that ties into that as well.
Reentry and making sure that fathers have the adequate services that they need in order to, one, be an advocate and a active citizen that's reentering into society, making sure that they have trade services available to them. These are things that we should be teaching while these individuals are incarcerated, making sure that, one, that their child support cases are frozen through the Department of Child Support Services or Family Services Division, whatever your state actually calls it, to making sure that their arrears are not constantly accruing as they are doing
language behind bars.
Yes. And that's essentially what it is. This is part of the stigma and the occurrence that has been going on for years, where fathers continue to rack up debt for something that they actually can't pay. While they're sitting in jail, we've sort of gone through this backwards process that essentially puts weights on top of fathers as far as the availability of services that are available to them as they re-enter society, and even fathers that has never had a run-in with the actual system. A father could simply just lose his job. He has to go back to court and fight to actually modify his case. That could take time, and as that time goes on, his arrears continues to build up.
The costs continue to
accumulate.
accumulate.
And it's cumulative. So it goes back to the time he actually lost his job up until the time he actually finds a job, and that the case continues to roll along with the amount that he owes in back child support. And then the bad part about it is the state acts like a bank. So they apply interest on top of it. So money continues to rack up and is owed back to the state, especially if a mother is on child support or social services.
I think it's really insightful because not only did you mention dads needing to be present, but that you mentioned additional factors in society that tie into that. As a family life educator, that's one of the things that I promote and I encourage people to be aware of, that one thing affects the next thing. Whether or not you're able to go to school and get a job, that affects whether or not you're able to come home and deal with your family in a healthy basis. Whether or not you're able to, deal with what's going on, emotionally, whether or not you end up turning to, substance abusing drugs and or alcohol, whether or not you end up losing your vehicles and fall into, a different financial depression. So again, it's all cyclical. And then we need to be more cognizant of how these things tie into one another. When you have, because I also know that you work with some awesome partners, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and the time that you have in dealing with a lot of these men, have you come across a lot of them that are able to say that they have a support system, or are we still kind of shying away from men saying that they need help?
So I think that's a multifaceted question, and which needs a multifaceted approach. What I find is the place of refuge for a lot of fathers resides in the barbershop. This is where we have those hard conversations, but it really doesn't actually translate to anything beyond that. And what I mean by that is fathers recognize that they need help, but they haven't given voice and projected that outwardly in a form of an actual true movement. We have these conversations.
Aside from, as you're saying, discussing it and kind of venting
Correct.
to, their fellow gentlemen in the shop.
Correct. And it's, venting among each other. When you look at, in the past, and you have all these various different fabulous nonprofit organizations, Mom Against Drunk Driving and Mom this and Mom that, that's because they've given a voice to the actual pain, and that's something that fathers need to do. If they're really serious about wanting to make a change in executing and implementing the change that we actually want to see in society, we have to square our chest up, tighten our belts, and make sure we get out there. We should be on the corners every weekend.
But you're a man. You should be able to deal with that on your own, right?
And that is the stigma in society. Society really hasn't given a voice to fathers to really, say that it's okay to feel pain. We've always been taught, even as a child, from the time that we go through infancy all the way up to adolescence and beyond, that we internalize our pain.
Man up.
Man up. This is where you tighten your belt, you get out there, you be a man, you go make it happen by any means necessary. And this is where, depending on if it's a financial issue, this is where most fathers can sometimes, whether they're young or not, turn to the streets.
Any means necessary.
Any means necessary, and this is the stigma that society places on us. I mean, it started back in the 60s when a lot of fathers were going out into the field, into the military, whether they were deployed overseas. You go work, and I'll sit home and take care of the kids. And we really haven't changed too much and evolved that much over the past 50-plus years. Beyond that, the court system itself still believes that fathers should get it done by any means necessary, no matter what obstacles that they may face along the way. Get it done by any means necessary. And I think we just have to take a step back and start giving a voice to fathers, and giving them space, to sort of navigate themselves through their pain, and give them a voice so that they are able to outwardly express their discontent and find solutions to those actual problems. We find that there's various different levels of disparities between services that are offered to women versus men based on gender. Something as simple as that is a very discriminatory practice.
Do you think that's because our society, and when I say society, we're not only looking at Prince George's County and all the people that are running for office, but within the areas, we still don't realize, and I want to say the most recent study that I looked at was probably 2015 from the U.S. Census, where we look at income disparities between men and women. It's not the same as it was back in the 50s and 60s. There are a lot of women, and I think it's about, I think the last report that I saw was 74% of women are actually out there making, close to $60,000 annually, and many more. And again, that's just the average. Many more are bringing home six figures. They have enough money to care for themselves and their children, which isn't to negate that they don't need support of the other parent. But that also means that there are a lot of men that also aren't just making that money.
Yes.
And so I do believe that society hasn't caught up to that, where as you said, men have to work and the woman, but she's got a job too. She makes more than he does.
Yes.
So what do we do in those circumstances?
Yes. And that's where we sort of find that the equal pay for equal work issue surrounding gender gaps in pay has taken on a different meaning and voice. As you mentioned, women have caught up to income levels that men have been making for actual years. And that's
not all the way there yet, but
not all the way there, but they're
close.
To the ceiling. But that speaks to the point that I made earlier, is that women have been given the power and the backing of society,
right.
and that resonates in multiple different areas. Whether it's the court system, whether it's through their actual employment services themselves, they're starting to take a stand and fighting back against a lot of the stigmas, particularly surrounding motherhood and parenting, and making sure that, one, that they have an equal footing. Now we're actually looking for fathers to have the same voice, besides, essentially fighting for equal pay and equal work. We need to make sure that fathers get the same type of voice and the same type of ear, if you will, that would allow them to have that same voice as it relates to the rearing of their children and their families. Okay,
let's take a quick notion over to rich people, because we often think that rich people don't have the same problems as us, regular folk that's going to work 9 to 5 every day. The story that came out last month about Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. Now, mind you, both of them are millionaires. Both of them have equal money, and I really don't recall reading who has more, but both of them are in the millions, yes. With regard to net worth. And the children that they have, the story that broke that Angelina Jolie was chastised by the courts because she wasn't sharing custody with Brad. And she also was one of those parents that came out, one of those mothers that came out and said, well, he had some violent tendencies. He was mean to the kids, so he shouldn't spend this much time with the kids. So what do you think about that? Did you hear about that story? I
actually missed that part of the story. I didn't hear that part. I remember them, going through, or at least hearing that they were divorcing and splitting up. But again, that goes to show you that when it comes to visitation, if you will, there is no...
How's a parent visit their kids, by the way? How do you visit your kids?
I hate that word. We've sort of tried to change the stigma, at least here in Maryland, with the various different legislative bills that have been placed on the table, to actually call it parenting time, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're not a visitor in the life of your child.
Absolutely.
If you are imparting wisdom, if you're doing the daily caring and nurturing of the actual child, that's parenting. Whether me and my ex is together or not, I'm still a parent.
Absolutely.
And that's the way that society and the actual courts should actually look at it. But back to your points concerning Angelina and Brad, even as it relates to the income between the actual two, what we find is a lot of the rich folks, if you will, get sort of hit with this big, tumultuous amount of child support. When what we really realize is when they're in the house together, this is not the same amount of money that's being spent on a regular basis.
That's true.
And there is a incentive behind...
And that's rich or not, by the way, rich or not.
That is rich or not. There is a incentive behind the amount of child support that actually gets collected. So
an incentive for who?
It's actually an incentive for both the mother or whoever is actually receiving the child support itself, but it's also an incentive for the state and the child support enforcement division. So
you mean there's a benefit for them to collect child support?
Definitely.
My goodness.
So what most people don't know is if you do a little bit of the digging in the actual research, the federal government actually reimburses the state 50 cents on the dollar.
That's half, y'all. That's half.
That's half of essentially the amount of money that's actually collected on an annual basis.
Now, who usually pays child support?
Most of the time, it's men.
So this would seem like some, and I'm being satirical, but I'm really being serious.
Yeah.
We're going to try not to go too deep, but this would seem like some type of conspiracy towards men.
Yes. Yeah, I think it is. I think this is a part of a larger plan to emasculate men. This is the feminist movement, as I've been, sort of calling it, and making sure that men will do what we tell them to do. We will not give them a voice, and we will silence them within our society, so that in the end, women get their voice back.
Does this cross cultural lines, or do you think
no,
this is focused on a couple of
the weird thing is
crayon boxes?
This issue itself doesn't just resonate within the African American community. This is across the board. You have it, crosses religious boundaries as well. You have both white, black, Asian American men, and all different types of cultures and races that have gone through this respective issue, and they have empowered women, and I hate to keep saying women, but this is essentially, when you look at the actual statistics, you'll find that about 85 to 90% of women are actually given some form of sole custody as it relates to their actual parenting time. And
wasn't that because we're the better parent? Just no need for debate. We're just going to automatically assume that women are the better parent.
That's relative, and it's not. I've heard many people say, as they've conducted surveys, a mom should automatically get the child because they birthed them. The reproductive rights of women is an issue that I'm sort of closely tied to. I have both a wife and a daughter, so these sort of issues matter to me. But I believe that in the end, we have to draw the line in the sand and say we look at both individuals as being equals. That they are equally equipped. The weird thing is,
we shouldn't make the assumption. That
we shouldn't make the assumption that mom is automatically the better parent. And again, that's relative. It's opinion based. And we've sort of evolved over time in looking at statistics. They did a study about 2 or 3 years ago that basically said that there is no one parent has a more of a nurturing spirit than the other. They've sort of seen the evolvement that the services that are being offered to parents, whether or not they are non-marital or even marital births, as it relates to that, that there is an equal footing. That men are starting to, and have been for the last 5 to 10 years,
given the opportunity
to be a staple, if you will, in the rearing of their actual child. And that goes from the everyday things of feeding, bathing, changing diapers, comforting the child when they're upset. These are all standard duties that fathers should be involved in on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I know that, and most of you that know me, you follow me, you know that I believe in facts first. Facts first. Favorite 4-letter word, fact. There's some things that we're
not
just
alternative
not
facts. We don't do alternative facts over here.
Look, facts. Again, some things we're just not going to debate. We don't get to draw straws on who's going to have the baby. That's one. That's a fact. It's always going to be the woman that's going to have the baby. Yes. Fact number 2, it's always going to be a fact that we know that the mother birthed that baby and that it's her child. One, because they're witnesses in the delivery room. Whether or not you're having a baby in a car or in a mall, they're witnesses to say that that is her child. She gave that baby.
Yes.
Fact 3, the mom is supposed to feed the child, which is the reason why the Lord gave us many forms of wonderful breasts to make sure that our children eat.
Yes.
So that's fact 3. Now, everything after that is certainly something that, we can discuss and envision, because when I was married, on my second child, we shared this with our daughter. I didn't breastfeed my daughter. And so Dad took part in, like you said, bathing, feeding, changing diapers and things like that. And even if I know plenty of mothers that breastfeed, but of course they may bottle the milk so the dads can help feed. They alternate work schedules if necessary, or whether or not their kids are going to daycare, dad's picking up, dad's coming home, making dinner and things of that nature. So it's certainly, like you said, while some things are relative, that's natural. Given an opportunity with a parent that wants to be a part of their child's lives, we certainly want to make sure that we're able to support and encourage a dad to do all of those things.
Yes.
Fact number 3, most men pay child support because the courts unilaterally will mostly give custody to the moms,
yes.
Regardless of if she's a fit mom. I remember there was a case a couple of years ago, and the name escapes me. I actually pulled it up on my computer. I'm having some difficulties. But there was a family down in Calvert County. They're a black family, and the mother, she actually has some mental health issues that her family knew about. The dad, I don't think he was so sure of, but that was the child who the mom left on the swing, and the baby died.
Wow. And
the dad was upset because he had been going to court back and forth to get custody. Again, he knew something wasn't right, and ultimately the child ended up losing its life, the little boy's life, because the family did not want to acknowledge that the mother was not the best parent.
Yes.
And so oftentimes we need to, like you said, look at that case by case, well, who's able to do what, who's willing to do what, and we're not just going to assume, because the same with me, when it got to a point when I became sick and, was diagnosed, my kids went to stay with their dad. We argued about it initially because I was prideful as a woman, and, I come from a family of single moms. You better take care of your kids. You better raise your kids, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, but I'm sick and I'm depressed and I'm suicidal. So do you still want to leave these kids with me?
Yes.
And like I said, I appreciate and I thank God that my ex-husband was able to step up and say, that's okay. I got it. I'm going to take over to, full-time parenting, and you can spend time with the kids, when you're able to.
Yes.
So again, I'm a classic example of we're not all equipped. We're not all sane. And all of us simply don't have the resources to raise a child just because our gender says, or we think our gender should dictate who raises a child.
Yes, agreed.
So.
And that's the one thing that I will say is oftentimes we adjudicate in both society and in the courtroom our cases based off of our own internal biases. And we automatically assume that a father is ill-equipped in order to care and rear their actual child. And what we've seen, especially as it relates to the African American community, is that black fathers are more present than they've ever been, and that statistic, continues to increase on an annual basis. And the services that we provide, back in the days of high school and junior high school, they used to teach during I think it was called home ec.
Home ec classes.
Home ec classes. They used to walk around with the little eggs, and you had to essentially treat the egg like it was your child. And then they came out with the whole, what was it, baby alive?
Fake babies.
Fake baby that did the crying and the bowel movement and the urination and all of that. And so I say that to say that as a society, we've sort of pushed along that this is what a mother is supposed to do. Fathers aren't offered the same type of services. But you're starting to see that evolve. I realized as time went on, they started pairing the kids up. You take the egg today. You'll be the father that's assigned, to this particular egg, and we give the egg a baby name. And we switch back and forth, night to night, so that they can understand the dynamics and of what it takes to actually raise a child.
Can you be a good father and not be a boyfriend or a husband?
I think you can. I don't think the title is to the place where it has to be labeled or attached to somebody. I think any type of male figure that has a emotional stake and wants to see a child, do their best, whether it relates to sports or rearing a child through their adolescence into adulthood, just making sure that those traceable patterns of behavior, where if you have an absent father that has not been relatively present in their life, that you're able to step in and provide those gaps, and to help put those pieces of that child's life back together in a structured manner, to making sure that they grow up to be, again, adults that are productive in society.
And emotionally healthy.
And emotionally healthy.
All things emotionally healthy.
And that's where I think we need to strengthen our services, and with having a more focused presence on mental health and making sure that both fathers and children are able to fill that gap, and mothers as well. I don't think we do enough with offering services on a non-paid basis, because we essentially attach it to some form of insurance, or there's a incentive of payment behind it. As it relates to the mental health profession, of course they have employment assistance services, but that's tied to your employment.
Well, actually, if you receive county services,
yes,
due to the and this is prior to the Affordable Care Act. If you receive county services, you receive free medical.
Yes,
called Medicare or Medicare and Medicaid, and then they have the child health programs, the CHIPD
yes.
program. So parents can get, if you receive these services, you can get free medical services.
Right.
You can actually get free mental health counseling and services.
Yes.
To see a psychologist, and a whole lot of us need to see a psychiatrist, so a whole lot of us need some medication.
But it's conditional, as you mentioned. It's conditional. It's whether or not you receive county services. But then there is a population out there that doesn't receive
that falls in
services.
that middle.
That falls in that middle ground.
You don't make enough.
You don't make enough.
And or you make too much.
So. And that's skirting the actual poverty lines, where if you make just above that, you don't qualify for a lot of services, such as services through the county, whether it's, and also legal aid. We find,
and I think a lot of fathers fall into that as well.
Yes, you have a lot of fathers that fall within those particular constraints, and you see that, sort of manifested in navigating through, multiple different avenues, whether it's if they're a single dad, and the mom is sort of either passed away, or maybe she was a deadbeat, and she went on to further her actual career, find herself. And needed some space to sort of do that. We find that there's a disparity in services that are offered to single dads. The weird thing about it is, as it relates to single moms, there's a plethora of services that are available as it relates to shelters, where essentially a place for children to actually lay their heads at night. We also find that legal aid becomes available for a lot of mothers that have suffered through domestic violence situations, or even the ones that have made allegations of domestic violence. That, again, as I mentioned previously, automatically takes your case in a different direction. But some women will do that just to get the free legal services to make sure that their case is slam dunk.
Yeah, we're going to work on some joint legislation on that soon, too, because I do believe that when women make claims, false claims, just like men should, you need to serve some time. You need to be prosecuted for that, again, because you're affecting someone's livelihood, because you have some issues, some emotional problems. All y'all. So switching gears a little bit, did you happen to see the Facebook video that the young man put out, that he was making the exchange with his daughter and his daughter's mother?
I missed that.
I thought that I sent it to you. Okay. Well, let me give you the scenario, and I know some of you have seen it too. It's on Facebook. Young black man and the woman, I want to say they look like they were in their mid-20s, and they were clearly making an exchange for the child. The father mentions in the video, and it was actually the father who was videotaping. He had someone with him. But he had asked, the mom was holding the baby, and he said, okay, well, I drove 2 hours to pick her up, just give her to me. And the mom insisted on putting the baby in the car. His car. And he said, no, you can't get my car. I don't trust you. I don't know you. And she was like, well, then she's not going with you. She's not going with you. So she put the baby down, proceeded to walk back to the car, and the dad tried to re-engage her. And she said, why don't you trust me? Why can't I just put the baby in the car? I want to say bye to her. He said, you can say bye to her now. So they had this back and forth. The video lasted probably about 3 minutes. But of course, there's a whole lot of dialogue on Facebook about, well, he should have stopped being petty and just let her put her in the car. And then, of course, the other side will... she should have just stopped being petty and given him the baby. So again, this ultimately, and mind you, a lot of people, good intentioned people say, well, this is why you need to go to court, so that you can make these things official, or have someone else drop the kid off if you guys can't get along, and things of that nature. If I was a man, and the Lord knew not to make me a man, he knew not to make me a man, because I would be just the worst man ever. I have all kinds of chicks on this. I mean, if I was a man, and having somewhat been in that type of situation, fact number 5, women tend to make it difficult. Bitter women tend to make it difficult for dads.
Yes.
And mind you, I don't know what type of history that we had. None of us do, unless we actually know them, because there's always two sides from a story. But from what we saw, making the exchange, brought some hurt. Because mind you, I didn't hear anyone talking loud or yelling, but the baby was confused. Right. I'm sure she was probably looking forward to seeing her dad, or if she hadn't seen him in a while, this would have been a good opportunity for her to say, okay, Dad, let's go into the next phase. Okay. So does your organization also help in instances like that, if you don't have a court order in place, or you're trying to work with the mom to try to help facilitate, better relationships so that you don't have those type of situations?
We can step in those particular cases. We also have referral type of services such as OBF. And also Kids Need To with Alexis Dobbin, that really focuses on making sure that we understand the issues at hand, navigating through those issues, and making sure that one, any issues that is left on the table. What we find is a lot of times when individuals separate, a lot of the issues tend to fester over time, especially.
Because I'm still angry.
Yes, I'm still angry. I still, I'm mad at you that.
You still owe me $20.
You still owe me $20. You didn't.
I saw you with that ugly chick at
the last time that we ran into each other, you was out with some other girl, and I got self-esteem issues. She looked better than me.
or she didn't, and I'm mad about that.
And I'm mad about that. And so, getting through some of these issues, we find that they manifest in different ways, and that's sort of the behavior concerning the actual video that you sort of see, is not really having security in the process and overcoming a lot of the issues that have sort of lingered. And that translates into multiple different forms. These sort of hurt both men and women. People,
because it affects your subsequent relationships as well. Because women tend to look at the next man in a certain type of light, and vice versa. Men do the same for women because he was. And
hurt. We do the same thing. We treat those same patterns as patterns of behavior that we take on from relationship to relationship. And we look for those patterns as indicators, which is what you should do. But I think we do the yellow and blue flashlight. We look at a person through the lens of their previous relationship and trying to compare their behaviors to that. But when it comes to, I think, expanding on whether or not a person has, violent tendencies and all of that, and where we start to dive into that a little more, I think is where we need to be more so cognizant.
Right.
And
things that we should pick up sooner.
Yes, making sure that we protect our children, because as we navigate through a lot of relationship, we're not actually checking the backgrounds of the next person that we're constantly engaging back and forth and presenting our children to. Let me
interject something here. You mentioned engaging with the next person, the next relationship. That also reminded me that oftentimes, as you mentioned also earlier, allegations of abuse. Why is it that we see so many instances of everything was okay when we were together, but now that we're not together, you've always been abusive to our child. Yes. You've always been abusive to me. So why is it that we see that?
Well, I think that's a multi-threaded type of question. There's the incentive, the money incentive, that drives some people to actually do it. The bad part about it is mental health has sort of taken on this new language, if you will, that now we call a simple argument, mental abuse, and it can get to those respective stages due to the way we communicate. But then I think understanding the dynamics of how to have a healthy relationship. That's something that I think all of us at some particular point should have some sort of training in.
Yeah, they need to start teaching that in schools. They really do. I know my sister is a huge advocate of that.
Yes.
She works in the school system. And so that's also something else for our county folks, local, to start looking at. But we really do need to start assessing what a healthy relationship is. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of awesome groups that look at that and start trying to talk to our young people about healthy relationships because again, hurt people. And oftentimes we should be able to see those things. Sometimes you just need to take a breath, call later, come back later or something like that. But having that immediate engagement of recognizing we're arguing, we're disagreeing, it's over now. And now that we're going to court, it's an issue that, I was verbally abused.
Right.
Or I was financially abused because you took the car. And oftentimes, like I said,
took all the money out my account.
Look, and oftentimes it falls on the man that ends up, suffering the consequences of those type of allegations.
Yes, definitely. So. You'll find that a lot of men, at least the mechanisms and constraints that the child support system has put in place, is that they'll lose trade licenses if you're a plumber, if you're an electrician, if you fall behind on your child support. These are some of the ramifications that are counterproductive and counterintuitive to you actually being able to be financially supportive to your actual child. And not only that, they'll throw you in jail, essentially, for...
Well, that's what's really best for your child, for you to be in jail.
Of course, of course. And allow your arrears to stack up, and you know, maybe when you get out after you have lost your job, will make it a little harder for you to obtain employment.
Right.
So now you have to depend on state.
And then the mom is still looking like, how come you don't have no money? How come where my child?
Every time I turn around, you don't have no money. Why you don't have no money?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent, of women's issues and supporting our women. One, because most of our women are mothers, and most of our women, one, fact, have children, and two, end up getting custody of children, and they need support. And first and foremost, they need the support of the fathers.
Yes.
Like I said, we don't have to be together, but we still are responsible for our children, because even though I may not like you, even though I may have disdain for you because you hurt me, or I feel that something happened in our relationship, it's still a fact that if we go to court, they're gonna make you pay, they're gonna make me do something. So we still share that jointly. Yes. What about dads that have issues with not so much getting custody, but getting DNA confirmation that those are their kids? Because that also ties into the other fact that we can see that that's your baby, but don't nobody know if that's his baby.
Yeah, and I think that's something that should happen at birth. I think if there is...
So you support that too?
I do support that. I think at some particular point, if there is any uncertainty, that we should be testing.
There's always uncertainty. You don't know what anybody's doing unless you're with them 24/7.
Exactly.
My right hand barely know what the left hand is doing.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I'm a big proponent of getting tested for DNA. I don't care if you're married or not.
And the bad part about it is, once you sign your name on that certificate of birth,
it's over.
It's over. Statute of limitations in most states is 3 years, and if you do not raise the issue within that time frame, you are considered the parental guardian of that particular child. I think eventually we'll get to the point where there may be some fines or penalties levied through legislation for women that falsely commit paternity fraud.
And that's what it's called. It's called paternity fraud.
And I think that at some point, I think men just have to be more vocal and speak up.
And protect your seed better.
Yes. Wrap it up, fellas, wrap it up. If she crazy, run.
I said, we joke about this all the time, but I'm like, she cute. Look, when y'all look dating and she doing all this and she's sassy, but after you get her pregnant, she got that baby. How this look?
Exactly.
So yeah, our men definitely share some responsibility and need to be held accountable for who they make babies with. So.
And I think at the end of the day,
that's good education too. When we teach our young people.
Yes, that is something that needs to be ingrained in the curriculums within our schools, making sure that we have in our teaching about healthy relationships and being
Back
a
to
bridge.
Those health classes.
Yeah, being a bridge between fathers and mothers, essentially, and navigating, even in the event of separation, the process of what it takes to create an emotionally healthy child, navigating through the various different issues of disagreement, and being essentially a mediator between each other.
Right.
To work through a lot of the issues, work through the feelings, because what we essentially don't want, and what we find is a lot of patterns of behavior as children, turn into the behaviors of adults.
Exactly.
And what you find is, and at least in our society, where there's a lack of a lot of accountability of self-awareness, and making sure that we all have the adequate tools available to us to be not only productive adults but also healthy adults, both mentally and emotionally.
I think that one of the biggest indicators that we should be able to see, and a lot of us don't pay attention to it, is that our children watch us and they learn from what we do, not oftentimes what we say, but from what we do. And oftentimes single parenthood begets another single parent. Yes. So if you're having children and you're not married, you're having children out of broken relationships, your children would do the same. We see a lot of kids, having babies, in their teenage years and their young adult years, and our kids end up doing the same because they haven't learned, one, how to have a healthy relationship, one, how to take care of our bodies and to be a healthy individual, protecting our precious eggs, protecting our precious seeds, and knowing how to to work together in doing that.
Yes.
So that's also something we need to be mindful of.
Definitely,
So.
and again, it goes back to traceable patterns of behavior. And the bad part about it is what you find is individuals that come from that type of environment, they have nothing to trace. Usually, we go back to a lot of assignments that we, looking at, an actual figure. They don't have a figure to trace. They don't have a pattern to mimic. So essentially,
a positive pattern
to mimic. And so whether it's negative behavior or not, they follow what they see, whether it's good or bad. And the bad part about it is we make the excuse of, well, I didn't have a father in my life. I always say that's been a piss poor excuse for a lot of people. Because
and y'all need to stop that, because if you didn't have a father, you should at least see how not to be.
Exactly.
How not to be.
And those are called sensory patterns of behavior. We need to use our sensory patterns in order to help us navigate through what not to do if you did not have a father. Oh, I know exactly.
And you probably know someone in your community, your neighborhood, on your block, your next door neighbor who doesn't have a father.
Who doesn't have a father. But I think this is where it comes back to being a village for each other.
Right. And holding people accountable. Holding people accountable.
For those types of things, so that one, we don't fall by the wayside, and then get into this pattern of behavior of making excuses for the rest of our lives for our shortcomings.
Right.
Instead of being a voice for yourself and internalizing everything, being that sounding board.
Absolutely.
And that springboard for each other, essentially.
Absolutely. Well, as we're wrapping up, can you tell our viewers how they can get in touch with you?
You can contact me through my website, fairforjustice.org. That is fair, F-A-I-R, the number 4, justice.org. You can also reach me on Facebook at facebook.com/Fathers Against Injustice. And you can also reach me on, actually, I'm not on Instagram, but I am on Twitter. I am on Twitter at
tweet
at Fair for Justice on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Well, again, I want to thank you for coming on the show and, of course, giving us a lot of information about different aspects of fatherhood and how we can be more supportive and how we need to be more mindful of what's going on in the lives of fathers, making sure that they're not only available, but they're active in our kids' lives. We do think that it's important, as those of you know, following OBF, we have a plethora of resources on our website. You can go to our website at www.obf4u.org. You'll find Mr. David Washington and his organization is listed under our list of organizations that are able to help you in multifaceted areas, whether or not you need family law assistance, whether you need health care, child parenting assistance, whether or not you need mental health services, whether or not you need domestic violence and shelter services. We have a variety of resources available on our website for you. Again, we want to thank you for tuning in. Please be mindful. Again, we're still coming fresh off of Father's Day weekend. We want to, again, support and encourage all of our dads to be active in our kids' lives, to be active in the lives of our families. And also, mothers, make sure that you are aware this is a no-no. You are not a father. Okay, so everything about, I'm the mother and the father. You're not a father. Fact number 5, you can only be a father if you have a penis. So if you don't have a penis, you're not a father. So go and sit that down. There's a seat for you over there. You are not the daddy. So again, we want to thank you for tuning in to this week's of Shaynel's 3 Cents. We look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place. And remember, you may not like it, but at least you heard it.
We'll see you back. That's right.